I'll say it. I absolutely love the fact that Oddworld Abe's Oddysee is a political platformer with a core message. You will never see a Mario game that breathes a negative syllable about capitalism. Oddworld blatantly and often violently displays a world where the poor are literally eaten by the rich. Just for having a strong political statement in a game aimed at kids in a genre that's almost entirely narratively desiccated, Oddworld is already one of my favourite platforming stories alongside Celeste and Psychonauts. The way Oddworld portrays its message is just so brutally upfront that it makes it impossible for even the youngest of kids not to understand. The strikingly distinctive design of the Gluckin is made to represent a stereotypical wealthy businessman, an esophagus-crushingly tight suit, a tycoonish cigar leaning from the side of their mouths, a wrinkled face and furrowed brow, white. The Gluckin are also committing every crime imaginable. They cause the extinction of entire species, enslave their employees and torture them for any mistakes, and cause masses of pollution and the destruction of the natural world. But what's their motivation for doing this? Greed. That's it. There's no grand plan to conquer the galaxy, or use their funds to build some kind of super weapon. The only reason the Gluckin commit these heinous atrocities is because they want more money. It's so deliberately shallow. There's no rhyme or reason to anything they do, no deeper meaning, just pure, unadulterated avarice. Of course, I have absolutely no way of knowing how rich people think, but maybe there's a little bit of racism to it as well, or classism. I mean, not every single Gluckin can be a millionaire, or their economy would collapse. So maybe there's some kind of disdain for those who don't have what they do, which once again is just unfiltered hate. The Gluckin are some of the most deliberately despicable villains in video game history. There is absolutely no justification for anything they do, and what they do is so egregious that it's downright cartoonish how vile they are. Now, anyone watching this video whose head or bank account isn't as dense as a neutron star will understand that this is an outrageously obvious political statement of anti-capitalism. It's mind-boggling just how relevant the theme of a quarter-century-old game still is today, especially in American culture. The profits over people way of running these corporations run rampant across every industry, especially video games. The game does take some liberties and over-dramatizes certain things. I don't think any American corporations are torturing their employees. They're simply cutting their pay and making them work overtime. But how else could you convey to 10-year-olds that the Gluckins are awful? They don't have jobs, so they can't sympathize with the Mudokons' workload. But anyone can feel sorry for someone being exploited. Oddworld also comments on veganism. Personally, meat is something I could never give up. It is also my dream to eat every chicken on Earth, so I can correct whatever god made the horrible mistake of giving life to such a repugnant creature. But Oddworld makes a good case for going green. It's awful how lambs and cows are butchered in such terrifying environments. It's a necessary evil, however, as humanity needs to eat meat to survive. The meat industry also makes enormous contributions towards the impending climate disaster, which is a far more grievous sin. What I love about Abe's Oddysee is how it didn't mince its words, no pun intended, when communicating its story. It walks right up to a kid, says, "This is why corporations don't care about you," changes that child's forming psychology and leaves forever. That's astonishing. Oddworld also emphasizes the cause behind all of this disregard for anything resembling values. How the Mudokons refused to fight back and allowed the Gluckins to put themselves in the unreachable positions of power they're in today. How the people that could have stopped them just didn't care enough. Despite the unabrasive way Oddworld conveys its message, it does it under the guise of toilet humor. And yes, while toilet humor is the lowest common denominator, the mixing of this entirely unfunny version of slapstick with a horrifying political message gives Oddworld a peculiar tone. Make no mistake, it's not muddling its audience. Oddworld is a game made for kids, but it speaks to them with such bluntness it's dizzying. I'll go so far as to say that Oddworld is the best game ever with a dedicated fart button, even though I still find it cringy that a group of adults came up with that idea. That's not to say Oddworld is entirely devoid of genuine giggles, most of which come from our protagonist, the liberator of the slaves, Abe. I've always been a fan of the nobody becoming a messiah-like figure, and by nobody I don't mean your average Joe, I mean the butt monkey and ridiculed loser ascending to godlike status, because if Jesus ever comes back, everyone's first assumption will be he's a crazy hobo. I love the totally unassuming weakling design of Abe. He's not portrayed as the physically strong hero of the Mudokan, but he's still visually distinct from everyone else, and his ugly cuteness fuels this series. I also really like how, even after he becomes the avatar of the Shrikal and savior of the Mudokan, he's still the bumbling fool. I think it's appropriate that all the comedy is at Abe's expense, as the Gluckin would lose all their menace if Abe kept causing embarrassing things to happen to them, and the game would lose its message about the apathy of corporate bigwigs. Furthermore, you can't just make a game with a political statement and expect kids to enjoy it, so the slapstick is much more forgivable than the embarrassing fart jokes. Oddworld Abe's Oddysee is a kid's game through and through. Still, it's not afraid to loudly exclaim its anti-corporatism messages into the minds of its young player base. It's a plucky game brave enough to unabashedly tell its players how to think about a world they've barely experienced yet, and shape the minds of a generation yet to come. In contrast, it does have to balance this with incredibly awkward and unfunny fart jokes. Abe's Oddysee has one of the most powerful messages I've ever seen in a kid's game.